Hello, I'm Richard Peña, professor of film studies at Columbia University, and I'm here at the Quad Cinema in New York City for the Cohen Media Channel to introduce a program of films by the great Maurice Pialat. If someone were to ask me, just in case someone wants to ask me, who I thought the greatest French filmmaker was since the days of the French New Wave, very immediately my answer would be Maurice Pialat. There's no other director that I know of who has a body of work that is not only so significant, but so simply excellent and so continuously influential as Maurice Pialat. Unfortunately, he's never really gotten his due. I think that audiences, in a way, haven't really caught up to what Pialat was up to, but certainly a number of critics, and especially filmmakers, have always really been in the Pialat camp. A number of especially younger French filmmakers have told me over the years how much his work means to them and how much they really see it as a kind of standard that they'd like to measure their own work against. So it's wonderful that Cohen Media has this package of Maurice Pialat films. In fact, a couple of years ago, they helped sponsor a tour of Pialat's work, and we can't have enough retrospectives of this enormously important director. There are 5 films in this package. Pialat worked from a period from about 1969 till, I guess, about 2004, so the career wasn't very long. And even though he was slightly older than the people from the French New Wave, he actually started his career later. His first feature film was in 1969. By that point, of course, Godard, Truffaut, Chabrol, Rivette, Romer had all made major films, were all international figures. But for various reasons, Pialat was never part of that group in a kind of personal way, although his work, I would argue, is a constant dialogue with the French New Wave. In many ways, it sort of takes a lot of the conditions of that particular movement and pushes them even further. There's an extraordinary intensity to all of Pialat's films. One feels every moment that there's no let-up, there's no moment of pause, no moment where we can just sort of rest easily. That's because it feels like every moment is so highly charged. We know that Pialat filmed an enormous amount of film. For every shot, there were numerous takes. And that, I think, gave the films, after a while, the sense that the actors were more than just giving performances. They're actually living through this experience of working with him. He also was notorious for not necessarily matching takes. In other words, rather than giving us smooth transitions between shots, sometimes from one shot to another, you'll see that a character has moved slightly or something's a little bit different. For Pialat, that didn't really make any difference. He cared less about continuity than he did emotional intensity. And he would choose what he thought was the best shot, even if there were some elements in that shot that weren't perfectly matched to the shot before it or to the shots that would come up. Again, this gives these films a sort of jagged quality and adds, I think, to the emotionally unsettling quality that so many of the films have. Pialat has often been described as a filmmaker who makes films about la France profonde, deep France. Again, a kind of France that you don't normally see in the movies. France from the provinces, from the suburbs, or even when his films are set in Paris, in kind of demi-mondes of that city that often don't make it to the screen. There's something in a way of really plunging into the heart of France, a kind of France that isn't really spoken about or studied very often. And yet this was the France that Pialat was most comfortable in, the one that in a certain way he wanted to reveal, that was really his lair and his turf. The first film that's part of the package is, I'd have to say, one of the most difficult Pialat films, but also one of the most beautiful. It's a film called The Mouth Agape, and it deals with the death of Philippe Lyotard's mother, or a character who plays his mother. Like so many of Pialat's films, the film is somewhat autobiographical. By that I don't mean it's a record of the death of Pialat's own mother, who in fact had died shortly before the film was made, but it's about experiences that Pialat had, which then, through the process of art, he represented to us in these kind of fictional narratives that he created. So there's always a kind of connection to Pialat himself in all of these films, but again, transformed through the process of making it into a fictional work. It's a film about a woman who's dying, and there's really no way that she's going to get better. So it becomes a death watch kind of film. And during that death watch, the relationship of the son to the father, to his romantic partner, to the town that he grew up in, all of these things come out in different scenes and different kinds of confrontations that the film really registers. The film was also notable in terms of Pialat's own work for being the first film in which he really used extremely long takes. Many of the shots are 80, 90 seconds, sometimes a couple of minutes, which adds to their intensity in a way. He really kind of keeps characters and stories and whatever all in focus during these very, very long takes, which sometimes become almost unbearable. We can't wait for the film to cut so that we can go somewhere else or have a little bit of a breather. But Pialat rarely gives us that. Again, the film is emotionally very intense, but for me, one of his most satisfying films. It's a film that really takes a certain issue and really sees it through the end in a way. Again, that's one of the things about Pialat's work. It's a kind of cinema that doesn't really make excuses or compromises. It really pushes whatever its subject is as far as it can possibly go. There's little sense of commercial consideration or those kinds of things. What's most important for Pialat was always to get at that emotional truth of whatever situation he was trying to depict in his films. The second film, chronologically, that we have in this package is perhaps one of his less known films, in a certain way less regarded films. But I must say that when the series of Pialat films began to tour a few years ago, I had the chance to see it a couple of times and to realize that it really is a terrific film. I mean, if it's not as good as the best Pialat, it's certainly an excellent film in its own right. And that's a film called Graduate First. It was a film that was a little bit unusual for Pialat because it's a film that's set among young people. And he's not a director who had a particular rapport with young people necessarily. Late in life, he did have a son, but prior to that, he was someone who didn't really frequent that world or think of that world as being his own. But again, he sort of plunges into this world perhaps a little bit like an anthropologist, and really comes up with its codes, its fears, its conventions, what the youth of France, again, from not the sort of Parisian France that we normally see, but from that deep France, what it feels and how it thinks about what its future is going to be. Again, many of the relationships are kind of harsh in the film. Some characters sort of appear and disappear. He shot the film over such a long period of time. There were literally actors who had to leave the film because they had other commitments. So their characters just disappear, or they're told to us they've gone somewhere else or something along those lines. That was another frequent quality of Pialat's films. Because he filmed so much, sometimes he would have to literally change his scenarios because characters were no longer available, or sometimes he would just fire them. He got angry at them and didn't want to work with them anymore. Anyway, again, it's, I think, a youth film that's quite an original youth film, one that really is about the struggles of these young people, especially as they face a France that seems to have less and less opportunity for them. The film is made in the late 1970s, just at a moment when what were called sometimes the 30 glorious years, from 1945 to 1975, when the French economy was growing by leaps and bounds practically every year, when the French economy began to sort of decline. Manufacturing, all those kinds of things that we know too well from our own country, began to disappear. And with that, the hopes and aspirations of a lot of young people. I don't think any film captures that feeling as powerfully as Graduate First. So I think you'll enjoy seeing it. The next film, Lulu, was perhaps the film that for Americans became the crossover film, although we can't say that Pialat ever really crossed over to the American public, but the one in which I think people became aware of his work, partially because it stars two of France's best-known actors, Gérard Depardieu, at the moment he was really becoming a major international star, and Isabelle Huppert, again, also someone who is really in her ascendant at that point. It's a film about physical desire, and few films have been as raw in their treatment of that. Pialat takes on something that's inexplicable, and he doesn't try to explain it. He tries to capture it, he tries to depict it, but he doesn't explain it. He doesn't really get into the reasons why Nellie, the character played by Isabelle Huppert, becomes obsessed with Lulu, this man played by Gérard Depardieu, but one senses an extraordinary physical bond between them, something beyond chemistry, almost, to use a loaded term, a kind of animal attraction that neither of them knows how to contain. There are, of course, victims of this, especially Isabelle Huppert's husband, in a wonderful performance by Guy Marchand, and other people as well. But it really is the description of this kind of overwhelming physical relationship between these two characters that forms the core of the film. And again, unlike other films that want to treat eroticism in different ways, kind of, examining it from different points of view, here I think Pialat is just interested in the phenomenon itself. It's fascinating to think in the context of French film in that era also because, of course, this was a time when French cinema was often moving into eroticism, the Emmanuel films and things like that. But those films, of course, are mere titillations. It's Pialat who actually hones in on what this phenomenon is and really tries to communicate what physical desire might actually mean or might actually look like. After that, we have two remarkable films by Pialat, two of, I think, his very finest. One is his Cannes Film Festival winner, Under Satan's Sun, which again stars Gérard Depardieu in a kind of surprising role for him, but one in which I think he does very well. This is a film that's based on a novel by Georges Bernanos, who's best known probably to film-going audiences as the author of Diary of a Country Priest, the wonderful film by Robert Bresson. You can't think of two filmmakers less alike than Bresson and Pialat, yet both of them, I think, get to the heart of the matter of those novels. The novel Under Satan's Sun deals with a miracle, and with someone who is seen as a priest whose faith is wavering, whose faith comes back partially because of his exposure to something miraculous. And again, it's interesting to see a religious film, or a film with a religious theme, made by someone who was a declared atheist, like Pialat. How he kind of looks at what the ramifications of this discovery are, how he really charts the development of a character like Depardieu's priest, and how he himself, who takes a role in the film, Pialat also acts in this film, really becomes a kind of very important interlocutor, very important narrator for the action that's going on. I should say the film also stars Sandrine Bonnaire, an actor who was discovered by Pialat in one of his earlier films, A Nos Amours, sometimes also called Suzanne. It's a beautiful film, not a very successful film at the box office, but again, for those of us who love Pialat, seen as really one of the high points of his art. A kind, again, very unusual assignment for such a physical, earthy director to make a film about a religious miracle, and he presents it in a way that only he could. The last film chronologically we have in the package is his film Van Gogh. And Pialat started as a painter. He actually painted quite a bit, and I personally think his painting was very, very good. But he abandoned his painting to go into photography and film, which, of course, is what he's known for. In his painting, you couldn't say it really has been influenced by Van Gogh. Everybody's painting has been to a certain extent. But what it really is about is the role of the artist. As I mentioned before, all of Pialat's films are somewhat autobiographical, and while Pialat would have been the last person to compare himself to a genius like Van Gogh, I think he's very concerned about the role of artists in society and the relationship of artists to those who have money to pay for art, for producers. For me, it's always been not only a film about Van Gogh, but a film about Pialat's relationship with the kind of establishment that paid for his films. Pialat was not someone who worked on small films. I mean, they weren't super productions, but he demanded a certain budget. He used stars. He demanded a very long shooting time. So these weren't cheap little films. These weren't films that were being made on a shoestring. These were productions, and he was very lucky to have the support of the Studio Gaumont through much of his career to be able to work like this. Yet at the same time that he needed this, there was a sort of resentment against it at the same time. And I think that really comes out in a film like Van Gogh and the relationship between, Van Gogh and his patrons. You really see in that relationship perhaps a kind of mirror of the way that Pialat saw himself vis-a-vis the film industry at that time or throughout his whole career. Someone who both depended on them and at the same time was sort of furious at them, furious that, he had to struggle as he felt so much to make every new film. It's an interesting biography of an artist who, of course, has been brought to the screen many times by many different directors. This is a very unusual portrait. He used the singer Jacques Dutronc in the role of Van Gogh and gets, again, an extraordinary performance out of him. One really senses a character who at any moment could really slip into a kind of madness and really is on the edge of that throughout the entire film. Dutronc is really an impressive actor in the film, and I think never gave another performance nearly as strong. So that's a little summary and introduction of the work of Maurice Pialat and these 5 films that are included in this package. As you can see, Pialat is someone who means a lot to me. There's so much to say about his films. I'm sure that you'll be intrigued, provoked, and in fact, I think you'll enjoy his films because indeed it's a major body of work. As I mentioned, for me, the major body of work of cinema made by anybody in France after the French New Wave. So please enjoy the films. I'm Richard Peña, and for Cohen Media, thank you for watching.